Good morning and welcome to Light Talk. This is Stan, and I'm coming to you today from Madison, Wisconsin, where we're going to interview Ann Valentino and Sarah Clausen of ETC, the amazing women behind all the lighting consoles that you have used over the years. It's going to be very interesting. David is in Central City working on a show, so he won't be joining us for this, so it'll just be Steve and I. And here we go.
And Sarah, thank you so much, for taking the time out of your day to talk to us today. I certainly don't know a lot about you other than your bios. Can you take a minute and tell us what you actually do at ETC?
Sure.
Sarah and I are both controls product managers, which means that we are the interface between the market and the needs of the market and the development team who realize those needs. So we basically, Sarah can jump in anytime, she's much more articulate than I am. Basically, we look at the feature set that's required for either a new product line or an existing product line based on what we're working on, put those needs into requirements that are then acted upon by the developers. So we're the interface between the market and the R&D team, effectively.
Yeah, I mean, we do a lot of listening. I think our biggest role is to really, well, there's two sides. There's first listening, and then there's interpreting what we hear into requirements that we can give to engineers. And that could be hardware engineers, that could be software engineers, that could be explaining why a replacement part, doesn't actually fit the bill. It's representing the touch and feel of a console because we know that programmers are really into how their buttons feel. For example, you have no idea how many discussions happen about the clickiness or lack thereof of a button. And we have to interpret all of that stuff that comes from the market and turn it into the products that we then ultimately sell. I call our role defending the product against the R&D team because the engineer wants to do what an engineer does, or they'll find a cool thing and they say, oh, we should do this thing. And sometimes we can just know that that cool thing is, it's cool to you, but I'm going to hear about it for a long time afterwards. So,
and one of the most interesting parts of the job, especially in controls, which I think is slightly different than other product management jobs, is a lot of times what people are asking for isn't what they're looking for.
Right.
And so sometimes someone will come to you with a request, and certainly in the land of EOS, because people understand the product so well, they'll actually tell you, and here's the syntax you should use, and here's how the screen should look, and what they're actually asking for is a fix to a problem that lives somewhere else. So in a lot of ways, especially on an existing product line, the job is like an archaeological dig. You kind of have to listen to what they're asking for, ask a lot of questions, like don't give me solutions, tell me what you're trying to do, and then dig back through the software to find, is that the right answer, or is the thing we're really looking to do changing this behavior over here instead? And because a lot of times people are putting Band-Aids on Band-Aids on Band-Aids. And so what you want to do is always get back to the root. And sometimes it's a very direct request and it makes perfect sense. And sometimes the solution actually lives somewhere else.
It sounds like a lot of back and forth to
Absolutely.
get there.
There's a huge amount of communication, both
Yeah.
with end users and with the developers. And that's the fun part of the job.
That is actually.
It's like the eureka moment when you go, oh, we see
yes.
how to actually deal with this in a meaningful way.
Interesting.
There's a classic. It's like the question of, do you listen to your customers or do you give them what you think they need, that kind of thing. And there's this classic example of if Henry Ford had listened to his customers back before the automobile existed, they would have said they wanted a faster horse. Right? And so I think generally speaking, we get a lot of I want a faster horse requests, but the job, the ticklish part of this job is to be able to take those requests and then turn them into the actual solution to the problem. It's not just you need a faster horse. You also need something that doesn't tire out mid-travel, mid-trip.
Or mess up the streets.
Or mess up the streets. You don't have to clean up after one. You don't have to keep feeding, one that doesn't get sick. Those are all the problems surrounding the horse in this particular case. So we have to hear what all of those problems are. And, if you're in the rock and roll industry, your problem may be described in one way. And if you're in theater, another, and in television, another. But they're all suffering the same problem, but they're describing them in different ways and perhaps offering different solutions to the same thing.
Do you ever find, there's this story about tomato sauce in marketing where there was only one kind of tomato sauce, and then some guy came up with the idea that there ought to be a meat sauce and a marinara sauce, and the people said, they don't want that, they buy this tomato sauce. And then they did that, the experiment, and then lo and behold, people didn't know that they wanted 8 different kinds of sauce. Do you ever find yourselves making things that we all of a sudden go, we didn't want that, but actually that's really
we have
great.
a great example with magic sheets.
I was going to say the color system
Well,
as well.
the color system as well. There are several examples actually, but the drive for the magic sheet functionality on EOS was actually more from Europe.
Yeah.
Because it existed on European product, and so there was especially from our German office kept coming, we need this, and we finally get to it, and we do this implementation. We go to a specific market in America, and they're like, we have no interest in this. We have what we need. You have wasted time on a feature that we simply don't need.
Yeah, we will never use this.
We will never use this. And within about 2 weeks of releasing, that was software version 2.0, I started getting phone calls from associate lighting designers saying, I do not know how we ever did a show before we had this tool. So you'd never know. Now, there's the inverse of that, too. Sometimes you spend a lot of time on something that you think is really exciting in the market. It's like, yeah. You try to catch those before you spend engineering time.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's risk art. You don't really know whether a feature is going to hit its mark. And it's not because of your implementation, necessarily. It's because the market doesn't need it.
Yeah.
Even though it's very cool.
Well, the inverse is they didn't know they did.
They didn't know
they didn't know they would like it.
Magic
right.
Sheets was that case. The color system was that case. So yes, it happens. It's very gratifying when it does. But that's part of the challenge of the development effort.
Right.
That's cool. So how in the world did you two get started in this business, and what does it take to make a console? When you were reimagining a console.
Patience, lots of patience. I don't know. I mean, I think we actually have a very similar background. I mean, I have a Master of Fine Arts in lighting design. I have a theater degree. My father told me, whatever I do, don't go into the law, and here I am. So I wanted to be a lighting designer. Right? This is like Fred's story, right? He wanted to be a lighting designer and realized that was really not the best path for him. I needed health insurance, so I ended up working for manufacturers. This manufacturer, actually, at the beginning. And then through various travels, ended up at Varilite. You're going to hear this again. And then ended up back here doing ultimately what is just a job that I love because I like being a lighting designer, but I also like being a lighting programmer. I like taking the creative idea from a lighting designer who comes up with some wacky stuff and trying to make that machine in front of me actually make that happen to their satisfaction. So I consider myself an uber geek in that regard. I read the user manual from front to back. I work hard to try and figure out why the machine is behaving the way it does because that's the way that I can bend it to my will, essentially. And then I end up in a position where I listen to other people who don't read the manual from front to back and still want to bend the machine to their will, but they're not sure how to do it. And so that's where the requests start coming in. So now I take those requests and try to, synthesize what their actual problem is, what the solution might be, come up with the user interface for it, and then bend an entire R&D group into my will to get them to actually create that code. So it's a very parallel thing, I think, what we do as a lighting designer with a programmer working with a lighting desk. We're doing that kind of meta thing on top of that to create the lighting desk in the first place.
What about you, Anne?
I have a master's and also an undergraduate degree. And my first job out of university, after bartending, of course, because that's the first thing you do while you're looking for work, I got a job as a technical director at a performing arts venue that was being built right outside of Houston. I was living in Austin at the time. And shockingly enough, I was only 21. I got this job. It's a long story. He was a mentor to me, the person who hired me, and said at some point, you have to return this favor. You needed a break. You got one. Remember this in the future. This was the worst consulted theater ever. It was, everything about this theater was wrong. It had electrics that wouldn't fly all the way to the deck because the multi was cut too short.
Oh, wow.
It had, and the building was built and then turned over to the city, and it was intended for touring shows and also for local usage. So try explaining to the city council why this doesn't work. They're like, well, why can't you just hang the lights there and leave them there? Because it doesn't work that way. It had a hospital intercom system, so only one person could talk at a time.
Oh, my God.
I mean, just everything about this theater,
Jeez.
in addition to doorknobs that fell off and locked talent in their dressing rooms. And I got really interested in this. Like, who does this to people? These people spent a lot of money on this theater, and it was completely not functional.
Wow.
So I was going to a trade show in Dallas. I think it was I can't remember the name of the trade show. It doesn't exist anymore. And someone had introduced me to Joel Rubin, who was running the
Who's
sales.
coming up on an interview.
Yeah. Oh, really? Yeah.
Yes, we just booked him.
Introduced me to Joel Rubin because they were explaining my thesis when I was in school, which was on the psychological impact of color and light. And Joel and I started this discussion, and I said, I'm really interested in this. Do I need to go back to school in electrical engineering? What should I do? And they hired me at Kliegl to write operations manuals based off of a conversation. So I moved to New York, took over training for command performance and performer consoles.
So you were living in Long Island City?
I was living in Astoria,
I
actually.
remember going there to learn the performer.
But yeah.
Okay.
And then ended up at Strand for a while, working on Light Palette, began working on Light Palette 90, and then I had met Fred at a trade show right when the Expression product line was launched, and sent him a letter with my Mac that I hadn't learned how to change the font on yet because Macs were brand new, just congratulating him, saying everyone in the industry has for years talked about this concept of product platforming, so that you would have one core processor, shared software, and you would have multiple iterations of the hardware platform, but the show files were compatible. No one else had done it. Everyone had talked about it. Strand tried it, didn't work. Colortran had it to a degree with the Prestige, but I just sent him a congratulatory letter, and shortly after that I got a phone call, and it was right at the LMI acquisition. So moved to Madison I was hired as the dimming and control product manager, but then it morphed into the manager of R&D. And that's when we began work on Obsession. And then I kind of saw the moving light train coming, which ETC was not involved in, and went to Varilite, where we started work on Virtuoso, and then ended up back at ETC. So 3 times in my career, I've been hired at companies because we need to start a new lighting control console and we don't know how. That's why I went to ETC the first time. I was already at Varilite, but working in the architectural division, and got moved into entertainment because they'd been trying to replace Artisan and they just didn't know how to start. And then my boss said, we have someone in the company who actually knows how to do this. And then coming back to ETC, it was the same thing. They'd been talking about a replacement for a while and just couldn't get it started.
So when Fred says people, getting the good people, we got to the good people right here.
Well, engineers by nature don't want to make decisions because the moment you start to make a decision, you're narrowing your path. So before you put the first thing on paper that you're going to do, the world is your oyster. The sky is the limit. You can do absolutely anything you want. And so trying to make those very first decisions that begin to give shape to the product is something that is really hard to do.
Never thought about that.
Because I'm a linear thinker, I studied anthropology before I got into theater. My focus of a lot of my graduate work was theory and criticism, which is deconstruction. So if I bring any skill at all, which is doubtful on some days, it's let's break this down to its component parts and start to figure out where we have to start making the first decisions to build on. And
it's like a cue. If you make a change, then it has all these other implications down the road. So it's that kind of thinking.
We talk often about the idea of control systems having DNA. That and this is the bit that doesn't get taught in school. This is the bit that you kind of have to let a control system roll around in your head for a while to figure out why is it doing what it's doing. There's obviously there's usually a logical reason.
But we don't understand
why it's doing what it's doing, right? It's like expression consoles. It's like the most frightening button on an expression console was that track key.
Yes.
The record track key, and people put, bottle caps over it because or the CD go button, it's like, why do those exist? And they're actually, they can be quite advantageous if you understand
why they're there,
right? But a lot of people, the lights won't go off. It's like you hit go on the second fader. Why is there a second fader? It's like, just put a bottle cap over it and don't ever hit that again and you'll be fine. Why does that happen, right? And why was it there? And there were older features that actually were really cool that second fader pair would use, and then everybody's putting a bottle cap on it, so obviously they don't need it anymore, and off they go.
Which is one of the things we've really tried to focus on, both Sarah and I, with our respective product lines as they have come onto the market. There is a logic to a desk, and there's a reason that you make decisions as a developer. Certainly the core functionality of a desk is very much rooted in historical control concepts.
Yes.
We didn't come up with tracking. It came from piano boards.
Right.
We didn't invent any of this stuff. HTP and LTP all came from analog control as well. And a lot of people, even really good programmers, don't really understand what's happening under the hood. And a lot of education that's teaching programming can, not always, but teaching you what buttons to hit and knobs to move.
And not the underlying concept.
But if you don't understand, because 50% of a programmer's job is data management.
Right.
It's 50% art and 50% data management. And if you don't understand what the desk is doing with that data and how it's thinking about that data, you're never going to be as fast and as efficient as you could be. And I remember even on Obsession, I don't know why I have to append queue only when I delete a queue. I only know bad things happen when I don't.
Yeah.
Well, maybe it would be better if you understood why. And so we've really put a focus of the work that we both do together on trying to explain to people what these concepts were, because if you can put it back into the concept of a piece of machinery you were working on, ideas like tracking and preset can be realized easier because you can relate it to physical hardware.
Yeah.
And we've really spent quite a bit of energy trying to make that more accessible for people to understand.
I'm just thinking, as you were talking, I was thinking about a feature that I just learned, and it takes me back. So I go back to, one scene presets, and this recall from, I was like, oh, yeah, so if you wrote it down on a piece of paper, and I want to say, okay, well, go back to Q12 and just get me the data for these channels and pull them over here. Oh, it didn't take me long to get what you did, but the way it was engineered, that's possible. And I don't think that was possible in earlier iterations.
Oh, yes, it's been there since the very beginning.
Yeah,
Has it really?
On an EOS console, yes.
Yeah.
It's just new to me.
Well, and here's the thing, when you're working in anger, as our British friends like to say, you're using what you need.
Right.
Yeah.
It's very common. I've had conversations with designers who didn't know that there were certain tools in the color picker, for example. Like on the gel picker, you can recall gel as its best spectral match, its brightest version, or hybrid. And he's like, I had no idea that existed. Well, because
you didn't need it.
The button is a little hidden. We could do a better job at that. And secondly, he didn't need it.
I didn't need it.
Right.
And then so you kind of learn what you need to know as you're doing the thing, right?
I love the saturation. I love the magenta green. The level of, it's just beautiful.
Well, let me segue to that then, because you brought up a term that not everyone is going to know, which is HTP. So the question here, Anne, why do you love it?
No, wrong.
Is it Sarah? Who loves it?
No.
No, well, I don't love it, but I respect it.
Okay. Let me rephrase that then. And why the big no and the laugh when you hear HTP?
Oh, Luke took my comment completely out of context, but it still is not. Here's the thing with HTP, and because I am a linear thinker, and because if you look at EOS, pretty much every basic concept of EOS is based on how you would run a piano board, which is it's tracking console, it's a move fade machine, only moves and it's always LTP. In my head, I always want the light to do the last thing I told it, always. And
That's very Broadway. That's like
it is very Broadway. And I understand the concept of HTP because I need this light to be at this higher level until I tell it to do something else. In a modern world, and remember HTP goes back 50 years now, I would use priority. If I want a light to be doing something until I release it, instead of giving it an HTP value, I would simply put it at a higher priority. And some of that is because the handoff of HTP to an LTP source can be a little icky, especially if you're using priority. It's using LTP is a much more elegant transition because the desk understands where you're going. You're not releasing if a higher priority HTP state doesn't release its HTP-ness until it has hit zero.
And does it, in the old days, well, not old days, but memory mattered. So is it less memory intensive or was?
Well, I'll tell you what it does now from a programming perspective is if you just, from a processor standpoint, it's not a memory issue, it's a CPU issue. LTP is much easier and faster for us to calculate. We're only looking at one source. If we're working in an HTP world, before we can output to the rig, we have to look at all the HTP winners and decide who wins. Now, in a modern lighting control console, we've got plenty of processing power for that.
Yeah.
Right.
But you will
conceptually, it's
conceptually, and there are some consoles that actually limit the number of HTP sources you're allowed to have. because it is a burden on the processor.
Now, let me just say right here, as you're talking about this, I'm watching Sarah, and she is going from extreme joy and agreement to like she's having a cow and a stroke.
No, I'm not having a stroke. I mean,
That's what makes our conversation
that's
so
why we
interesting.
work so well together. See, I know from a long history of working with Anne that Anne is a control philosophy purist. Okay, and I think you wear that with pride. And Anne's role has been to do that deconstruction, start from scratch. I have a blank sheet of paper multiple times, and I have not yet had the joy of that particular experience. I'm an inheritor of existing systems, and in some cases, one might say a rescuer of inherited systems. So
I have done a very good job of that.
Or I am the angel of death in some cases. You know, I catch them at the very end of their life cycle and walk them out of the market gently, hopefully. Not always. Express was a bit of a trip. But the products that I've managed have been reasonably mature when I get them. And then I have to see what does it take to either keep them alive or evolve them into their next state.
You're surgical.
I have to be. I am. Yeah. It's an interesting and a different, because I have an existing set of assumptions that I have to work with, and I also grew up on expression consoles. So I grew up in a preset based system on a computerized console, and so everything that I learned ended up being balanced on this HTTP thing because that was just how it was with the way that expression worked. And it's carried forward. And the thing for me with HTTP is it is a burden on a control system because you're constantly having to calculate the HTTP state. You get into a particular state, and then you just want an effect that brings the lights down, and you realize, I can't do that. We came up with a reasonably clever idea in the Cobalt system, or in the Congo system before that, which was we treated effects as channels, as multi-parameter channels. So you could interact with them the same way you would do with a device. And what that meant is that the intensity handle was the master for the effect. So if it's a pan-tilt effect, the intensity of the effect would master the size, for example. If it was an intensity effect, it would master the maximum output of that intensity. And then all of a sudden, it became very clear that HTTP was our nemesis in this case because all of my effects are being HTTP'd with everything else, or with each other, right? And so there are moments where I absolutely hate HTTP. And there are other moments where I just want the stupid house lights to stay at 20% so nobody dies in the house during the rehearsal. But I want to write my cues as if they're not there.
So
right?
Park is a solution to that,
No, because then the house-to-half cue never runs.
Oh, okay.
Right?
So how do you solve that?
You set it, you HTTP the intent. Well, now we would do it on the network, right? The house lighting system would hold the 20% rule, and then the lighting control system would share that control with the house light controller. But that's only possible if your network is set up to allow an HTTP interaction between the dimmer channels that are doing your house lights. So you have two control sources in that case, HTTPing the network control of the dimmer. On the consoles that I've used in the past, you have multiple playbacks controlling the same dimmers and HTTPing amongst themselves. So there's a layer of complexity there, but this is why it's like sometimes HTTP actually is what you want, even though it turns your hair gray.
You can select LTP or HTTP to a specific channel in.
I think you can do it on subs.
It's a queue or a sub attribute.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a queue list attribute in EOS, and it's a sub attribute. But for things like house lights, one of the things EOS does, because you mentioned parking, is to throw it in a shielded sub. And a shielded sub is like a live park.
Oh.
So you can't grab the channels, you can't do anything with them. They're living on this handle. They won't get recorded into anything you're recording, but you can dynamically adjust the level, unlike a straightforward park.
But you're still not running your house-to-half queue.
Before Stan moves on to the next question, I have an easy question for you.
You think.
Yes, it's a surprise question, not in
dear.
the script. And you don't have to think too hard. And I mean this with all sincerity. When did you realize you were good at what you did?
Apparently, actually, I think in deference to David Jacques, he posted a Light Talk upcoming events post like a couple weeks ago. And you guys listed your upcoming guests in alphabetical order, which meant it was like Sarah Clausen, Polly Constable, Fred Foster, Anne Valentino, and whomever else was on that list. And I go, oh my God, how did I end up on this list? I don't know. I just do what I do. I'm just this lighting geek person who thinks way too hard about things that nobody else pays any attention to. So if that's good, then yeah, thank you.
What about you, Ann? When did you realize you
I'm
were
not
good?
sure I've ever realized that. Here's the thing about this job. This is not a job for the faint of heart.
All right.
Everyone is always telling you that you're wrong.
Yes.
Everyone is always telling you that they could have done it better. They would have done it differently. It is a job for someone who has a really strong sense of self, because, and that's a good thing. I don't mean that in a
Right.
pejorative way at all. It's a good thing because people care about the product enough to come back and fight you over something because they visualized it in a different way.
And there's an important thing about that, though, right? This sense of self thing, because you have to also have a good sense of distance from your own product.
Yes.
You have to understand
have
that
to
when
see
we
it
have
clearly.
these knockdown, drag out, late night circle bar discussions, that they're talking about the console, right?
They're not talking
Not
about you.
you.
They're not talking about
Right,
you and
you.
your decisions necessarily.
Right.
They're talking about this product that both of you are very passionate about and ultimately want to see the success of, right? But you can have extremely different ideas about what that path forward is going to be, depending on what they're asking for. So this is why understanding that DNA, that philosophy of your desk, of being able to know when somebody asks for something that just doesn't fit this product. I know it would make you happy, but that's not gonna fly.
I guess for me, part of it was they kept hiring me.
Yeah.
As long as you keep getting a job, I must be doing
That's a good
something
sign.
okay.
Yeah.
I often thank Fred for my phony baloney job, but yeah, it's been a good ride.
So, how far out do you have to be in research and development to launch a new console? So really, I guess the question is, what are you guys dreaming up now? If you can say.
It depends on whether you're designing a brand new product line where you're starting from scratch, or if you're iterating hardware. And you guys have been following our product lines long enough to know that we do iterate hardware and simply move the same software forward with it. We're living in a different world than we were living in 25 years ago.
We're living in a different world than we were living in
Yes,
5 years
yeah.
ago.
Yeah.
But it used to be that, you would design a product, you'd put so much stuff in it, and then you'd go, well, that bag is full. We can't do it. Was because of the way software was structured. And now you have to start over because we didn't rely on subroutines or any of, the way we did rely on subroutines. And so the way software is coded now is much more modular. And so the idea that at some point in time, the bag of stuff that makes this console is going to be so full, we have no other option than to start all over again. And that was typically the way it was done before. We don't live there anymore. We live in a modular world of software, so that a Fate engine could be picked up and taken to another platform. So, will we ever get to the point, and who knows, I'm not saying we would or we wouldn't, where we decide now every line of code for this particular machine must be written from scratch? Or are we going to say, we're going to do something new, and we're going to go and we're going to lift these tools from this software that we wrote, and we're going to lift these, and we're going to put them together, and we're going to skin them in a different way. So the opportunities to write something from the ground up are rare.
Yeah.
Does that end up with a cleaner, more elegant result?
Well, sometimes it can, but if you look at the software, and it was a discussion we were having really recently, EOS was architected 15 years ago, but it was relatively early in the adoption of some of the authoring systems that are used today. So that architecture still stands. It is still considered a modern architecture for software. So for us, there is no need to say, oh, this architecture was completely incorrect, or it was good for its time, but now coding practices have changed, and we need to start over. That may come in the future. I wish y'all luck with it. But certainly with my product line, we're not there right now. So if you're doing something from scratch, when we started EOS, Dennis and I ran around for about 2 years, just talking to people, sitting in venues, seeing what the issues were, crafting a scope document that had nothing, this wasn't even a spec really, where you wrote down what the syntax was going to be. It was just, these are the things we want to try to accomplish. And from that 2-year period until we actually started coding and then could do our first show was about almost 3 years. So that's one time scale. If you're looking at iterating hardware.
Hardware goes pretty fast, I would say, nowadays, generally speaking. You have to, your hardware decisions just as well as your software decisions, and hardware is actually a much faster timescale than software at this point in time, depending on how you wrote your code. Only because processors, it's like LEDs get brighter, so processors get faster, memory gets more efficient or bigger or whatever, and operating systems change underneath you all the time. So you have to be able to react to those changing bits of technology while maintaining a reasonably consistent software experience for your users. This industry doesn't like change.
It is conservative. It's not bizarre.
It's very
In a lot of ways, but and the change they don't like in controls, they are willing to accept in fixtures, which makes our lives a little bit more complicated, right? It's like what I said about 5 years. LED 5 years ago was not the thing it is today. Multi-cell fixtures 5 years ago, it's like maybe you had a Mac Aura, and it did two things. And now you've got BIs and God knows what else is coming out that's just, fixtures that take an entire universe of DMX. And how do you manage that data and interact with that thing?
And media, which is...
And media.
That's Fred brought up.
Interactivity of control systems with other systems in the show, right? Automation and pyro and God knows what else people are coming up with, The Coldplay thing with the wristbands with the LEDs in it, you're programming your audience into your show now. So how do you manage that interaction from a lighting control system? So things are moving very quickly around us, and yet we still don't like change.
But one of the reasons for that, though, is that these are tools that people make a living off of.
Yes.
Right? Unlike a lighting fixture, the choice of a control console, whether it's from the designer's perspective or the programmer's perspective, they are picking, and Sarah likes to use the analogy of a musical instrument, which it very much is. Imagine if you walked out and your piano had the keys arranged in a different order.
Right.
Yeah.
That would not be good for you.
It'd be very disruptive.
Yes.
So part of it is we have no time. Production schedules get shorter and shorter. It gets more and more expensive. So going back to something that you know well and you know instinctively, that you don't have to think about, that the way you're going to construct your workflow for this particular product is innate.
And your muscle memory is
And your
there.
muscle memory is all there. So that's one of the reasons that I think there is resistance to change unless there is a clear benefit for the user in that change, right? Because you can sell change and
Or a compelling benefit.
something that's compelling for them. But this is a tool that people make their livings from, and so there's a reason that you have to and you always have to understand that this isn't just a tool in their toolkit. This is how they make their life.
If they're a truck driver, this is their truck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
We had a question a couple of weeks ago that stumped us, and we said we would hold it until we saw the two of you in the room.
Oh dear.
The question was, who was the first console, who was the first company to have Rem-Dim?
Light palette.
It was Light Palette.
Yeah. It was on the original light palette.
Was that did you know if that was a conversation with designers?
I can tell you how the syntax for original light palette came about, and that was
Please.
This is my understanding of the story from the time that I did work at Strand. As you know, David Cunningham ran the engineering effort to create that product, but there was a man by the name of Chuck Levy who lived in New York at the time, and I forget exactly what his role with Strand was. But the syntax for palette, which is propagated through the whole industry at this point, was really sitting in theaters and listening to the way the designer was talking to the person who was cueing their auto transformer dimmers. And that is the origins of the syntax.
Makes sense.
The specific thing about Rem-Dim, I can't tell you where that came from, other than I need this up, take everything else out.
That was probably the original syntax.
And that probably doesn't fit on a button. So
Doesn't
they turned
fit on
it
a
into
button.
remainder dim.
So I can't tell you where the terminology came from, but it is my understanding that all of the syntax for that desk was basically originated from just listening to the way people talk to each other in the theater.
Yeah.
That changed everything. I remember the early Strand days where I have to learn, talk about the DNA, maybe I can follow up on that question. I had to learn how the engineers thought to run the console. And then there was a shift where all of a sudden,
then Light Palette happened.
Light Palette, they're talking like I talk. And that was followed through with ETC as well. But for students who some are reluctant to read a multi-page manual or don't find it interesting, how do we help them understand? I mean, we tell them the stories of how we got here, but I'm wondering, how do I get them to read the manuals or to dig in? They tend to want to like push the buttons and go, well, that didn't work, so I'll try this series of buttons, or ask somebody else to tell them rather than drill down to why does the console think the way it does. Any suggestions?
Well, we made a 3-minute video.
You have a lot of great videos.
Well, so in 3 minutes, all of our questions are answered.
bobblehead
Well, not
Fred
all
video.
of them. Not all. It was the first bobblehead Fred video, actually, because this, I'm telling you, this is a level of geekery that people just don't want to get into in most cases. But the ideas, the concepts are really important.
Yeah.
The ideas and concepts are also not that difficult. I mean, there's 6 things that you can, if you learn what they mean, then you understand a lot of how most lighting control systems work. There are exceptions, right? I'm calling it the Jan's, not Jan's Vista now because it was bought by ChromaQ. Is a timeline-based system. It's really like a video editing lighting controller. So it doesn't necessarily follow all of this. But even if you know these 6 things, then you'll understand why Vista is different and which pieces they've built in since they put out the timeline base that help to replicate these things. And that is the HTTP LTP thing, which is, that actually jumps the gun. Tracking and preset, which is how is the data stored. There's HTTP and LTP, highest takes precedence versus last takes precedence, which is really how multiple playbacks are negotiated. And then there's move, fade, and state. And that's just what's actually being played back. And those are really those are the
6
questions you ask at the beginning.
6 concepts.
And when you say those, because of my age, I get them.
Yes.
Because I worked with them.
Right.
But for a student who was born,
It's an abstraction.
yes, it's abstract.
What we typically do is, and I just got back from a trip to South Africa where we did a series of presentations on the philosophy of lighting control, is we bring it back to how would you cue on a piano board versus how would you cue on a multi-scene preset.
And first you have to teach the kids what those things are.
Yeah, so you show them a picture
That's the problem.
because they've never seen it. But we
Although
show
I
them a
do have
picture.
some old resistance dimmers in the
Yeah.
shop to show them, but
But if you can go through that and just go, okay, how would I write a cue on a resistance dimmer board? How would I write that same cue on a preset desk? Do you see how it looks different here? Yeah. And now I need to change the first dimmer in Q5 through 10. This is how I do it on a piano board. This is how I do it on a preset board.
Right. You always
And
have to move the finger.
that can actually, it's that simple.
it is that simple. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what the 3-minute video is, because it boils those 6 terms down into and shows actual piano
Is that an
boards.
ATC video?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll post it.
Yeah.
Right.
But with visuals, right? So they can see
Yeah.
this, right? And it's funny because it's bobblehead Fred video. We wrote a long white paper that's multiple
Right,
pages of
right, I
essentially
read that.
saying what we said in the 3-minute video. The changing it into a mechanical action as opposed to a conceptual action, I think helps people understand it. I've tried to come up with a live theater versus film analogy, which is, you tell the actor to go stand up stage left. He's going to stay standing stage left until you tell him to change his blocking, no matter what every other person on stage is doing, right? And if you tell him to start up stage left and walk slowly down stage right while all this other action is happening, he's running move fade. Right? And if you're doing film, you have to take a picture of that guy,
Every frame.
30 frames a second to get him to move down stage. And you're recreating his move, his position in a static state, and we're creating the fade.
And that's state in the sense.
That's sort of like state,
Right.
right?
Right.
It's a good analogy, actually.
So, if you go from this frame to this frame, you've done a snap cue. And if you let the film run, you've done a long fade. But you have all the data of the stage because you've taken a photograph of it every time.
Which is more processor intensive.
Can be, yeah.
Wow, this is insightful.
Yeah.
And Sarah Clausen and Valentino, thank you so much.
That Hammond organ solo tells us that once again you've spent another morning listening to Light Talk. Be sure to check out our Light Talk website at lighttalk.org, and be sure to follow us on our Light Talk Facebook group page and subscribe to our podcast. That way you will not miss a second of Lumen Brother insanity.
No guarantee is offered regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions on this podcast.
In other words, before you hit that go button, think about Ann and Sarah and all the great console features they've given us over the years. Light Talk is written and produced by the Lumen Brothers, coming to you from Long Beach, Gainesville, and deep in the heart of Texas. And today from Madison, Wisconsin.
And don't forget to tune in next week when we discuss what are our thoughts about women in the role of lighting design? What is the most challenging things that we do? And what is limelight and how is it used? I believe we use it in margaritas.
All that and the new sponsor, Light Talk, broadcasting questionable Lumen knowledge and humor around the world.
So we'll see you all next Saturday morning. Bye-bye from Light Talk.
Bye-bye, everyone.